Hello, and welcome to Mix Presents Sound for Film Awards Season. I'm Tom Kenny, co-editor of Mix Magazine, and I'm coming to you on the early morning hours of December 6th. We have 3.5 weeks to go with the eligibility period for this year's 95th Oscars Awards. But we're less than a week away from the voting opening on the shortlist. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the shortlist, 2 years ago, the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences adopted a new procedure whereby many of the craft categories will go through an early voting process to winnow down the year's eligible films to a specific number. In the case of Best Sound, there are 10 films that will be eligible for nomination. And in the case of Best Score and Best Original Song, 15. Shortlist voting begins on Monday, December 12th, and concludes on the December 15th, with the eligible nominees announced on December 21st. All that said, with 3.5 weeks of eligibility remaining, 2022 has been a dynamite year for film. In many respects. Most memorably, it marks the return to theaters. I think back to March when Warner Brothers released Elvis. Now, Warner took a bit of criticism in 2021 for refraining from theatrical release, but in March proved with Elvis that people were hungry to go back to theaters. And then, of course, in June, Top Gun Maverick, the Paramount release, long awaited, much anticipated, blew the doors off the box office and set sort of the trend for summer and the return to an exhibition audience. Personal aside, I was there opening weekend at Dolby Cinema with my buddy Jason in Emeryville, California. And it was spectacular. I felt like a teenage boy all over again, going back to the movies. And that opened the floodgates for the return to theaters. Both those films, Elvis and Top Gun Maverick, will be discussed today, or the sound jobs on those films will be discussed today. And they're joined by an excellent selection of films. We have Nope, Jordan Peele's sci-fi horror film with just a wonderful track by Johnny Byrne, sound designer. We have All Quiet on the Western Front, an all-German production with a German sound team. It's a stunning use of sound and music. We're fortunate to have the composer Vocal Bernament on hand. Bardot, Alejandro Inarritu's returned to filmmaking with what he calls a sensorial cinematic experience. There's an international sound team that is most excellent bringing that to life. We have Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, where stunning use of stop motion animation in collaboration with Mark Gustafson and sound designer, supervising sound editor Scott Gershon, creating an entirely new world mixed by John Taylor and Frank Montano. We have Spirited, a new take on Scrooge from the ghost perspective with musical numbers and high drama. Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds and Octavia Spencer dancing and singing. Wonderful track. Emancipated, Antoine Fuqua's Civil War drama featuring Will Smith. And just sort of the tough to watch and memorable to watch. We have 13 Lives, another based on a true story. The Thai rescue team, Ron Howard's dramatic a re-exploration of the studied news item that we all live through. We have Babylon, yet to come out. Damien Chazelle's look at the period in Hollywood when we turned from the silence to the talkies with an ensemble cast and just the true cinematic experience. And we have Tar. Oh my gosh, Kate Blanchett, a tour de force performance. And followed by The Batman. Couldn't be two more different films in their approach to sound, and each absolutely true to the director's vision. And proof that both quiet and loud can tell a story, tell the narrative. In between all that, we have a wonderful composer, Benjamin Wallfish, who worked on 13 Lives, traveled to Thailand to get authentic instrumentation, just wonderful music, subtle to accompany a highly dramatic story. And we kicked things off with Mark Mangini talking about Goodnight Oppy. Mark won an Oscar last year, the best sound for Dune, and now in a Amazon Studios wonderful documentary about the the rovers, Opportunity and Spirit, Mark returns to space, this time with the real sounds of Mars. Now, before we begin, I want to say a few thank yous. This is a sponsored event, and we certainly couldn't do it without the support of our sponsors. And we thank them most immensely for supporting the sound community through the promotion of these sound teams and the creatives. We have Universal Pictures, Warner Brothers, Paramount, Focus Features, and then the streaming services, Netflix, Amazon Studios, and Apple TV Plus. Thank you all. The community sure appreciates it. That said, there are a number of other wonderful films out there worthy of consideration for Oscars, including many to be released in the next 3.5 weeks. So please do your homework before going out to vote. I want to thank Michael Coleman of Coleman Film and Soundworks Collection for editing all these video interviews together. Believe me, the technical difficulties are ours. Michael does his best to work with the material he has, and I'm going to blame it on the internet, even 2.5 years in. I love this process. It brings us a lot of international talent, and we occasionally have glitches. My apologies. I want to thank my moderators, Jennifer Walden, the only layperson I know who shares an equal enthusiasm as myself for sound for film and television. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you to Clive Young, my co-editor at Mix, who not only moderated the film Emancipation, but makes this all available to all of you on the web, and mobile, and through social. So thank you, Clive. The team at Future, Janice Crowley, the Mix publisher, and the events team of Navi, Marie, Cassandra, thank you so much. Most of all, I want to thank the talent, the expert insights that we get from these extremely talented sound professionals. Comes free of charge. They are busy as can be. Hollywood is booming and busy right now. And they take time out of their day, busy schedules, working 6 and 7 hour week or 6 and 7 day weeks, to get this content out to us these last few years. And I can't thank them enough, one and all, for coming out and bringing their insights. So in a few seconds, we're going to begin with Mark Mangini, Good Night, Oppy, and The Sounds of Mars. Please enjoy your day and go out and vote.
I don't think anyone expected the rover to survive all these disasters. You get this feeling of we're basically invincible. Through this robot, we are on this incredible adventure together.
Humans are capable of forming a connection and a bond to a robot.
She rewrote the history books.
Good night, Opportunity. Well done.
Hey, Jennifer Walden here. This is Mix's Sound for Film award season virtual event. With me is the myth, the legend, the 2-time Oscar-winning master of sound, Mr. Mark Mangini. Hey, Mark, it's so good to see you.
Hi, Jennifer. It's a thrill to be here, especially for this documentary, which I am deeply in love with.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about Amazon Studios' documentary film, Good Night, Oppy. It's this incredible story of twin rovers who defied the odds and survived on Mars for much longer than NASA expected. Opportunity, affectionately named Oppy, of course, was in operation for nearly 15 years. So, Mark, going into this, right, what kind of research and sound gathering did you do? Did NASA have recordings of actual sounds that these rovers made, or was that something that you had to design from scratch?
Well, there's multiple parts to that answer, Jennifer. NASA, as you know, has an archive, a vast archive of footage of the development of the rover from conception to launch. But of course, from launch on, there are no recordings, and we'll talk about that because some amazing things happened sonically recently that affected my design of sounds that I didn't have, like the Martian surface. But NASA did have a single remaining prototype of Oppy in storage at JPL in Pasadena. And I was lucky enough to go to JPL twice and record that prototype in one of the Mars test beds. And a test bed simply means a terrain that mimics the surface of Mars. So I got to actually capture something that was very close, if not exactly like what we might hear on Mars if we were there with a documentary film crew and hanging a boom pole out and, okay, let's hear Oppy drive by, or let's hear Oppy turn, or let's hear the nav cam rotate. So I was able to capture many of those authentic sounds, which was a big part of my mission.
That's fantastic. And so I guess, as the rovers age on Mars, they start to deteriorate. Was that something that you had to imagine and design the sound of, or were you able to distress the one remaining prototype rover of Opportunity?
So indeed, it was a really significant challenge. And in fact, it was one of the 2 or 3 challenges that really gave me pause, because it was presented to me by the director as, Mark, we need to make Oppy sound like she has arthritis. And I thought, robot, mechanical, arthritis, human, where's the translation there? And it was in the text itself where I found my answer, as we are discovering that the arthritis came about from the many, many dust storms found on Mars that injected sand into all its joints. I got to thinking, oh, it's the sand. It's kind of gritting up all the mechanical bits, and it's getting stuck in the lubrication and the finely machined interactive surfaces. So I simply duplicated what probably happened on Mars by taking sand and applying it between 2 metal surfaces and then rubbing those surfaces. So we did things like Tim Walston and I, one of my co-sound designers, we took bicycle gears and door hinges, metal parts, mechanical parts, put sand on those surfaces, ground them together, and then applied those as sweeteners to these moments where you saw one of our Oppy's articulated arm. If that would move, you'd hear the servo motor as you would, but we added those grinding noises to imply this thing is really not in very good shape.
And what about the rovers, cute little voices that represent them communicating back and forth between NASA? What went into the sound of that vocabulary? That
was my second 6 minutes of terror, as we like to say in the movie. The entry, descent, and landing is their 6 minutes of terror. Both Ryan and I rubbed against the idea of an anthropomorphic robot like R2-D2. We certainly didn't want anything that whimsical, but we identified with the theme of this movie, which is like a parent-daughter, parent-child relationship. The scientists actually fell in love with this robot as one of their own, as if their own child. And we wanted to enhance that relationship by making Oppy slightly anthropomorphic. And we did that through the creation of a pseudo voice. The voice is simply meant to demonstrate Oppy communicating back to NASA, which it in fact actually does. It sends data. But my approach to that was to create data that occurred sonically in the envelope of human speech. As you know, human speech is broken down into many components like syllables and consonants and vowels, and it has an arc and a duration. So if Oppy were to call back to NASA, as it does, as you see in the film, and you see the chyron, I just saw my shadow. If a human said that, that would take 3 seconds. But in data terms, that's a millisecond or a nanosecond of data. But to make Oppy more, say, anthropomorphic, I created digital sounds in the envelope of speech that lasted the duration of what human speech might have been like. And to do that, I simply recorded hard disk drive sounds, arguably a sound that is already on Oppy, and modulated them or morphed them in the envelope of human speech by me speaking the line. So I would say, I just saw my shadow. I would use digital tools to modulate hard disk drive chatter in that envelope. So instead of I just saw my shadow, you'd hear kicker. And that's sorry for that bad imitation.
That was a great imitation. And yeah, When I heard it, I totally thought like the old hard drive boot up sounds, like, when they start to spin up. Yeah.
Thank you. Glad it was
Great
successful.
job. Yeah. So I'm not sure. Before I jump to the next question, I want to talk about the weather events on Mars. So there's dust devils and sandstorms, dust storms. What were some of the things that you considered when making the sounds for these weather events on Mars?
Well, stop me if you want to do this as a separate question, but an important aspect of the creation of the sound or the sound design for Oppy was the Martian atmosphere, which included its kind of presence as well as the significant weather events like, dust storms and what look like tornadoes. I wanted to, let me back up for a second. 33 minutes of this film are visual effects, extraordinarily photorealistic visual effects from ILM based on original high definition photography from Oppy and Perseverance. So there is an adherence to reality and verisimilitude, and I wanted that to be mirrored in the sound of the Martian landscape. One of my third 6 minutes of terror on this film was, what does Mars sound like when nobody knows what it sounds like? Well, we understand the nature of the atmosphere, the thinness of the air, and the presence of these weather events like sandstorms. So I began using terrestrially based sounds of deserts and wind and storms in barren environments. And I was having some success with that until the middle of that design process, when NASA contacted me to say, Perseverance, the current rover on Mars, actually has 2 microphones on it. What? Hold on a second. Sound is a part of space now? And we'll get to that, the sort of the cheat of sound in space. But nonetheless, Perseverance has 2 microphones on board, one inboard to monitor its internal systems and one outboard to hear the environmental sounds. And NASA sent me a small little snippet, about 20 seconds of Martian atmosphere. Now, all of a sudden, we know what Mars sounds like. And, I was giddy with excitement because I'm a geeky scientist myself. And I thought, this is the first recording of an alien world. The fact that I'm listening to it is a miracle. So I took that 20 seconds and stretched it and multiplied it and turned it around until it became an Atmos immersive environment for Mars. So now I had my bed, a bed that any shot that ILM had, I could put sounds on top of, and that was the actual sound of Mars. And in fact, the opening of the movie, after we come out of the Amazon logo and we go to black, those first sounds are the sound of Mars, the sounds of another planet. That to me is just incredible.
Totally. And yeah, that was my next question. Like, yeah, Perseverance, it's got microphones on it. So when did you get started on this film? And, after finding out that, yes, this is what Mars sounds like, here's a sound clip of it. And also that Mars has, hold on. Mars has sound travels on Mars differently than it does on Earth. So there's actually 2 speeds of sound. So the lower frequency sounds travel a bit faster and go a bit further than the higher frequency sounds. When did you find that out? And did you go back and change the sounds that you've already made to kind of fit into that knowledge base that we now have?
I didn't discover that till NASA notified me of these recordings, and having a fundamental understanding of sound and acoustics, I knew the atmosphere would affect the sound. As it happens, if you're particularly interested in this, you can go to nasa.org and there's a link that will bring you to the sound library that Perseverance has captured, and you can press a button that will modify a sound that you give to NASA, and it will show you or play for you what it would sound like on Mars. Now, because of that distinct difference in low frequency versus high frequency travel of sound, or the speed of sound, everything becomes, for lack of a better term, muffled or muted. And we felt as though while scientifically accurate, it wasn't dramatically interesting for our narrative. We're trying to present Oppy almost as a character that speaks, that perhaps, evinces some kind of emotions. So we felt as though sound needed to be in sympathy with that narrative idea. And so we wanted to present moviegoers with a sonic experience that they were pretty much used to. It would make the film feel, in fact, more authentic to do it that way.
Yeah, I think that's the right way to go, because just listening to, they have a recording of a helicopter, the Ingenuity helicopter on Mars, and just hearing that, it's such a disconnect from what you would think of as a helicopter sound. So yeah, I think that's the right way to go, like keeping the dramatic aspect of it and keeping that connection, the human connection with the rover in there.
Yeah, a good case in point would be the arthritis sound. That's a very high frequency, gritty sound that passed through the Martian filter, would not have actually played, and I wouldn't have been able to demonstrate the arthritis if we had followed that kind of verisimilitude.
And then there's the shot of I can't remember if it was Opportunity or Spirit kind of traveling over the dune, and you watch it like crawl away from you. Yeah, that if you had been going with the science, you wouldn't even have heard that sound. You wouldn't hear it traveling away from you. The sounds were too high pitched. Yeah.
Listeners can have some fun by going to nasa.org, because one of the sounds they've posted is the internal microphone of Perseverance, capturing all its mechanisms, including its suspension system and its armatures. And what's massively funny about that is, for a $1 billion investment on the part of the American public, when you hear Perseverance driving across Mars, it sounds like a 50-year-old junker. You hear creaks and groans and scratches of the armatures and suspension arms, all kind of rattling and creaking and groaning like it wasn't oiled. And when I first heard that, I thought, something is really wrong here.
That's crazy. Mark, you were also the re-recording mixer on Goodnight Oppy. What were the benefits of getting to work on the edit and the mix together? Like, what were some of the positive impacts that had on the overall sound of this film?
The positive impacts of being the sound designer and editor as well as the mixer were manifold. And I think it starts with the shorthand that Ryan White and I developed through the design phase. Having a very, very clear idea of what Ryan wanted sonically, I was able then at the mixed, I think, to be that much more efficient. If someone else had mixed us, they would rightfully want to take the time to review the material, understand what I had provided, bring their creativity to that. And in so doing, we were able to dispense with that part of the re-recording process, because I had already been through that with Ryan. In fact, as I'm designing, I'm also mixing. So on day one of the mix, and we only had 5 days to mix, I could hit play, and Ryan had something that he had already essentially approved. We were working through sequences and developing the sonic aesthetic, and we didn't have to pick and choose of, well, I like the motorized sound, but I don't like that rumbly sound. All of that choosing aspect of some mixes, not all, wasn't necessary. So we could really concentrate on the big ticket items. That process for me enables directors to do their job at its highest level, which is to say, conduct. I want to hear the string section here, and I don't want to hear the percussion, which is to say, Mark, you know what? I think music's really carrying this sequence. I could make big overall decisive moves in the mix that brought forth the drama or the verisimilitude without being mired in, what's that squeaky sound? Or I can't hear Jennifer here. We had kind of already done all of that work together. So if nothing else, it created a level of efficiency, which on some films, big feature films, you have the time to work through that and do a great job. On a documentary where you have 6 weeks of prep and 5 days of mix, anything we could do to create efficiencies was super beneficial.
Awesome. Did you have a favorite scene for sound?
Well, other than opening the movie with the sounds of Mars, that's a real favorite of mine, just because it's in the clear, and I'm thinking, I'm in Mars, I'm in space. This is incredible. But of course, the flight to Mars and entry, descent, landing, that's our set piece. That's our big action moment, which you never get in the documentary. And being able to design the fun stuff, which you kind of never get to do in documentaries. When you think about documentaries, the sound is meant to be diegetic, and it's meant to be something we recognize or terrestrial. And here I got to create the sounds of spaceships flying through space and sun flares emitting from the solar events, and all things that we don't have recordings of. And those moments allow me to use my imagination. And I'm particularly proud of that sequence. It's an extended 9 minutes because Blake Neely, our composer, who did this extraordinary job, and we must touch a little bit on Blake and what he brought to the film and how we worked together. Blake was doing gangbusters, action sequence music, and I'm doing gangbusters flying through space and explosions and space flares. And I'm particularly proud of that from a mixing standpoint, because I feel that it's a very deft dance of voiceover, which never quits. It's a constant presence throughout this film, and important sound effects that need to feel big and make you feel like something important or dangerous is happening, and the emotion that's being carried by the music, the danger that's actually inherent in the notes that Blake wrote. And I spent more time on that sequence than any sequence in the film, deftly trying to balance, weave in and out of dialogue, music, and effects to create a pleasing result. And I'm kind of I'm bragging a little bit. I hope that translated to the audience.
It did indeed. Okay, so just one final question for here. So what was one thing that you learned while working on Goodnight Oppy that's helped you to further your craft, to grow as a sound designer and a mixer?
I reinforced an idea that I've been building on in the last 10, 15 years, which is this notion that sound can be a vital and extraordinarily efficient narrative tool. Sometimes you can say 1,000 words with a single sound. I'll give you just a simple example. In the end of the EDL sequence, entry, descent, landing, the lander has deployed the big balloon that is going to cushion its landing on the surface. A very dangerous moment, one of the most dangerous in that sequence of events for NASA, the one that gives them the greatest pause. If Oppy doesn't survive that bounce, Oppy doesn't survive and the mission is over. The rover is destroyed. So I built a sound that in one sound, the landing, that first bounce, is large, subwoofer ridden, and a dynamic that hopefully speaks to the audience and says, until they see later that Oppy made it, I don't know if Oppy is going to survive that landing. Think of all the narrative that would have been. I just did 15 seconds on trying to describe it. If our filmmakers had to do that with a voiceover, that 15 seconds is now compressed into one sound that says, oh my God, that landed hard. I don't know if it made it. And so what I'm trying to say is that sound at those very appropriate moments, and it's not every moment, can say a million things in very briefly and very efficient.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you again so much for taking the time to talk about Goodnight Oppy with me. Fantastic job on this documentary, and best of luck to you this award season.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's been a pleasure.